Just to start, man, just introduce yourself, who you are, what you do for the listeners, and everything like that.
So I'm online. I go by Arum Natzorkhang. I'm a linguist on TikTok, and I talk about more specifically ancient languages.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to bring you on, man. I saw you talking about ancient English. So just to start, how about you give me and the listeners a little brief history of English, where it started, where it came from? Because when you were talking, I think the video I'm specifically talking about was when you were talking about how long can you go back until you can't understand what the English is. And it
Mhm.
didn't take that long for you to get back there, for me to be like, I have no idea what he's saying. I have to read what it means. So go ahead and give a brief history of English, where it came from, things like that.
So English is related to a wide variety of languages that are spoken in Europe, the Middle East, and South Asia. So languages like Welsh, Spanish, Russian, Persian, Hindi, those type of languages, and they all originated around Eastern Asia. West Asia, around Ukraine, some 6,000 years ago. And due to a lot of migrations that had them travel around to Western Europe and obviously down into India, they since evolved into the languages that we see today. And along with that came English, which sort of became its own language as it evolved from various Germanic dialects spoken around southern Denmark and northern Germany around the beginning of the first millennium. And from there, we start to see the first written English called Old English. And that's the language of the Anglo-Saxons and of Beowulf and King Alfred and all of that. And then 1066 happened, where the Norman French invaded England, and as such, it displaced Old English as the language of the royalty. Some centuries passed after that, and it evolved into Middle English, and that's the language of Chaucer. Then some centuries after that, we get our early modern English, and that's where we get things like King James and Shakespeare, and obviously the languages that we speak today. And these are, very much so separate languages. They're not like, like ye olde, thou beest and stuff like that. These are just like these real meat and potatoes type different languages, and you're going to have to go and like get a dictionary to try and figure it out. So, yeah.
So, yeah, because I mean, if I think everybody has to read Shakespeare in high school or middle school. And while it's difficult, you can still understand it. So where does the distinction, like you said, meat and potatoes, where does that distinction make? Does it become an old language or a different language? And where can you consider it the exact same, or not just the exact same, but pretty similar?
So I get these questions all the time. I always get these sort of questions, like how far will I be able to go back? And, like, oh, is this language different from this language, or is it just a dialect? And the problem with that approach, with these type of questions, is that linguistics is not a hard science. It's not physics. You can't really measure this sort of stuff objectively. It's largely a result of things like of social constructs and like cultural distinctions between that. What makes a language different from another one is not based on like a checklist that linguists have lying in the corner of their room or something like that. It's largely just cultural stuff. Language like languages like Hindi and Urdu, for instance, in India, very similar to each other, but they're considered different. And yet at the same time, you have all of these like very vastly different varieties of Arabic that are spoken in North Africa and the Middle East. And they're considered dialects. It's still considered that same language, despite the fact that they're very, very different. So it all has to do with culture. It's not like a hard science, really.
Yeah, and so you bring up Arabic, which is fascinating because it's the first or traditional language of the Bible. When you switch from one language to another, am I wrong about that?
Yeah.
I shouldn't have said something that I thought was true to
Yeah,
it.
I was about to say, okay, so Arabic wouldn't be like the written language of any holy text until the Quran, and that's around the 7th to 8th centuries. So
I
the
think we have
original language,
Hebrew, right?
it's the original language was Hebrew for the Old Testament, with some scarce passages in another closely related language called Semitic, not called Semitic, called Aramaic, and then the New Testament was written in Greek. But yeah, no. Continue with your Arabic.
Yeah,
these
well, I
discussions.
was just now it's Hebrew and Greek, but it seems as though when you're translating from like large text like that from one language to another, you lose a lot of specific words and specific sentences that make sense in one language to another. So, how much when a large text like that is translated, how much do you lose from one language to another? Is it vast, or is it basically there's enough words within specific modern holy languages, like not holy um, as in religious, but holy as in like specific and whole? Is there enough similar words to translate to, or do you lose a vast amount of what the meaning behind things are in those large texts?
So obviously you're going to miss some nuance because when you translate something, you are acting as a middleman between the reader and the original text, and that's always going to happen no matter what you do. Um, but it's largely dependent on the quality of the translation and what they're aiming for. You know, you can make a perfectly presentable translation of the Bible that has, you know, that explains everything perfectly. Um, but you know, again, it all entirely depends. You could have that sort of like, I don't know, you could have like a sort of bias coming in and trying to affect some passages here and there. But translation isn't, again, an objective science. There's no way to measure it with hard numbers and such. It's largely like I said before, a cultural thing.
Yeah, and fascinating that you bring up objective science because I took a philosophy of science course this last semester, and a large discussion that we talked about was how it's really hard to say anything's objective because of that bias that comes into hand. Like everything is traditionally theory laden, and you would think that when it comes to languages and specific cultures, because like the way you're talking about like societal inferences, you would think that when translating things there would be some type of theory ladenness respected to that culture, because if one culture acts in a different way and you don't really perceive that as normal or good, you would translate it to mean something else for your society, right? I would assume.
Yeah, and we can definitely see some of that. I guess that how would you present it? That presentability, that presentability in the Bible itself. Some books of the Bible are written in such a way that they are more accessible to foreign audiences. For instance, I believe it's the Gospel of Mark that's more acceptable to things like like Greco-Roman populations. It has a lot of parallels between Greek and Roman mythology in its descriptions of like Jesus Christ and such like that.
I don't know if you know anything about this, but I heard that I think I was watching, I don't know, Jordan Peterson or someone, and they said that a lot of the Christian stories or Christian stories within Christianity, they stem from ancient stories from ancient Egypt. Do you know anything about
Mhm.
that, and the Greek or the ancient Egyptian stories and how that played a role in? I think it was the Eye of Horus and Christianity.
Yeah, so and I'm gonna let you in on a little secret here. That's complete garbage, complete nonsense. So any sort of mention, so you'll see these images all the time about how Horus was like the son of a virgin on like the 25th of December, and they'll have it draw parallels to Jesus. When in reality, there's no Egyptian text that actually says that. It's just a bunch of nonsense, really. Um, I've read these Egyptian myths for myself. Nothing seems to indicate that Horus was the son of a virgin or that he was born anywhere near the purported time of Jesus or anything of the sort.
Yeah, and so being a linguist yourself, uh, does because it seems to me. First off, how many languages would you say you speak fluently?
Just English.
Just English?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so I study languages a lot, but the problem with ancient languages is that you can't be fluent,
Mm,
truly fluent in the sense that you know, you could be fluent in, say, like German, for instance, because you're always going to be viewing that language through literature and not as a spoken language, and so you're going to be missing a lot of that nuance that spoken language has. You know, it's going to be like a bit of a shock if we were to go back in time and try to speak Latin to some Romans, because there's things like various dialects and, you know,
Mhm.
speaking mannerisms that were just never written down. And so, you know, it's going to be quite a shock if we try to speak Latin to them.
Yeah. It would be as almost if like in like the future, say a couple centuries or even a couple millennia, if you know another society comes and tries to, or they're reading modern English, modern American English, and they were thrown back into like the southern accents, and then or they went to the West Coast or they went to the North Coast or anything like that, it would be because the way that you speak something is so dependent on where you live that it would be so different from just reading the text because you would interpret it through your own lens. Like that's what basically you're saying.
And there's also just the fact that we view is that English as is written on the page is very different from English as is spoken. You know, it's our sort of written language is much more formal. It's a lot more organized. Um, we use a typically a wider vocabulary, you know, more complex words and stuff like that that people wouldn't realistically use in, you know, casual conversation. So there's also just that sort of difference in style, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. Because like when you read like Shakespeare, or that's not really a good example. Even if you read like traditional scholarly literature today's time, like anybody that has a PhD, and let's talk about like multiple realizability through biology. If you read like a paper about that, like you're not going to sit there and read it, and then if you're going to convey the ideas to someone like a friend or a colleague, you wouldn't speak the languages specifically that they said within the text. You'd make it more nuanced, like you said. You'd make it more common, like the way the common man would convey something. I do understand that,
Yeah,
but
I mean, if you know, it would be like, you know, if exactly if someone started to speak as though it was a scientific paper, we would just look at him and then kind of look at each other and say, "Who's this fucking asshole?"
I was going
You
to say,
know?
look, who's this fucking douchebag, dude?
Yeah. So there's just some aspects and style that were just never written down for ancient languages. And so we're only able to view these languages through how they were used in literature for the most part.
How did you get into language and studying languages, and specifically ancient languages?
So I did it to flex on the hose.
Is
I'm
that
not
true?
kidding. I no, I'm not kidding. I did it because I thought that it would be like a good conversation starter in, you know, in parties,
Mhm.
of which I get invited to a lot. And so I started studying Latin around 2 years ago. That was the first language that I had actually like took the effort to learn myself after, you know, high school Spanish and French and German and all that. Which, by the way, I was awful at. I hated German. I hated German so much because I just didn't understand anything at all what they were throwing at me, and I didn't care at all. Looking back, I was just a fucking idiot. But Latin was the first one I learned, and then I sort of branched out to other languages that suited my interests. And what I mean by that is that languages that were a part of cultures that I was interested in. So, like Old English and the Anglo-Saxons, and then move on to Gothic and the Visigoths, Old Persian and Cyrus the Great, you know, ancient Greek and Herodotus and Homer, and all of that. So, and the languages that I've learned are more or less reflections of my interests in history.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated with history too. Like I said, I'm a double major, political science and philosophy. So history is right in the mix of that. I'm not history. Political science and philosophy. And so when you bring up Homer, um, Homer very much influenced like Socrates and things like that. I'm sure you know about that. But when you bring up Homer, that's got to be one of the first storytellers in history. What is the earliest written text that you've read? Like from what century?
So Homer was certainly one of the earliest storytellers, and he was the earliest storyteller of the Western tradition,
Okay.
for sure. But he was far from the first storyteller. And in regards to your question, the earliest piece of literature that I had ever read was also the first piece of literature ever written down. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the Epic of
Mm.
Gilgamesh was written around 3500 BC, though tablets that survive today are usually from around 1800 BC. And it was originally written in a language called Sumerian that was spoken in Iraq. And it's the language that has all those triangles and those clay shaped tablets that you probably see in the backgrounds of historical videos online. And you don't really know what it says and you don't really care. That's what Sumerian is. There are some other languages that are written in cuneiform, which is the writing system, like Akkadian and Hittite and other names that you snooze through in history class. But the Epic of Gilgamesh was one of the first ones. Was one of the first actual pieces of literature that was written down, and that was one of the early stories that I had ever read.
Remind me of the Epic of Gilgamesh because I have heard of Sumerian, I'm sure in philosophy, and I've heard of that story, but I can't remember what it was about.
So the Epic of Gilgamesh is the story of a great king of Uruk, which Uruk is a kingdom in Mesopotamia. So it's like in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers of Iraq. And he was 2/3 God, 1/3 man. Don't know how that works because, how can you be like 1/3 of anything? But basically he had that black Air Force energy. He was a fucking violent brute. He stole away the wives of husbands on their wedding day and fucked them. And so the people of Uruk were like, okay, well, we're gonna go and call upon the goddess who made Gilgamesh and tell her to fucking stop. And so the goddess was like, okay, well, I'm going to go and make basically a copy of him called Enkidu, and I'm going to go and send him out in the fucking woods and have him be like a fucking gremlin. And so he was like a little gremlin, and the people found out about Enkidu, and so they basically sent this prostitute to the woods with Enkidu, and then she had sex with him for like 7 days straight. And this caused him to not be a fucking brute anymore, and so he returns. Well, he went to Uruk, and then he had a big fight with Gilgamesh, but then Gilgamesh beat the fuck out of him, and then they became best buddies. And that's basically how the story goes.
That's a wild first story to ever be written down.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's something.
And you would think that like these stories, these early stories that are finally written down, they transformed the way the societies worked and how human society has evolved since then. Like storytelling, I feel like I've talked about this a couple of times with people, but I feel like storytelling and the ability to tell stories and the ability to write down history specifically is the most important fact of being a human. I mean, there's a lot of other things, but that was really what distinguishes us from them, is understanding there is a past and there is a future. Them being like animals, plants, things like that. But, it seems as though there are some stories that are so influential that they will never be, unless there is a catastrophic event that wipes out all modern humans, they will never be out of our society entirely. Like I would think of the Bible, Shakespeare, Socrates and Plato. What are some texts that you've read that you think have influenced modern humans that people might not even know about?
So the Epic of Gilgamesh is a really good example because one of the passages of the Epic of Gilgamesh describes the Great Flood of Noah. Oh yeah, yeah. So basically, the story goes is that a goddess told this guy that he was going to go and flood the entire earth, and he was going to go and build a boat, and so that way he would survive. And it has some parallels between the flood story that's found in biblical texts. Now, I'm not trying to say that the Israelites copied off of the Epic of Gilgamesh or anything like that, but I do think that they might have had some influence from a common source that was found in various Near Eastern mythology. So it's certainly influential in the sense that its influence parallels other ancient texts in that regard.
Do you think that there was a Great Flood?
I can't say. I'm not a geologist. I'm merely someone who studies ancient literature. It would be very strange if there was a great flood. I believe this was just a part of mythology.
It's crazy though, because I feel like there's a lot of other parallels between modern stories that I guess they wouldn't be necessarily modern, but stories that the modern people listen to, like the Bible or the Quran, or can't remember the one that's the African religion. But I would feel like there's a lot of parallels between ancient stories and like the Bible and the Quran and things, especially when you talk about. I mean, you said the one was bullshit was the Egyptian god and or mythology and the Bible, but how much has like Greek mythology and polytheism influenced monotheism and the storytelling of the modern religious people?
There is certainly a lot of influence, especially when it comes to Greco-Roman religion, especially on Christianity. So, a really good example that I can think of right now is in medieval arts. So, you ever heard of Ancient Aliens?
Yes, I have.
So yeah, so in one of the episodes, they were like, "Oh my gosh, you see it in all these paintings. You see like these flying UFOs, and it's like existence that aliens once roamed the Earth in the past." But if you actually know what you're talking about, and you don't look like you haven't had a shower in months, um, you can actually draw parallels between the UFOs and images of the sun and moon as is seen in various Greco-Roman art. This is a wholesale borrowing from that religion. The idea of personifying the moon and the sun as basically people driving little spherical planes is a direct borrowing from that polytheistic religion in Renaissance art. So it's far from an indicator that it was ancient aliens or anything like that.
So go back to what we said about modern English. I didn't catch when you said that. When does modern English become readable, or when does it become modern English and not a different language entirely?
Well, it depends. I can't really pin down an exact year for you because it depends on how well you can like listen to things. And there's also things like regional spellings that are more similar to our modern spellings than other regional spellings, which contain like more archaic rules and forms and such. That can throw us off a little bit. And there's also just regional dialects that existed back then, which are much more understandable to us
Mm-hmm.
than other dialects. But the general cutoff point is around like the 17th century,
Okay.
around that point. At that point, you're gonna have to go and like you're gonna have to like say what a whole bunch of times. And yeah, so beyond that, so that's like Shakespeare, King James, that sort of thing. That's like pretty much the edge that you can go.
Yeah. When does the modern alphabet become prevalent?
So that's a much longer story. So in order to go and explain the existence and the origin of the alphabet, we're going to have to go back some 2 to 3 thousand years. So with that, we have to go and talk a little about Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, despite what a lot of people initially think about hieroglyphs, it's really not that hard to read because it's phonetic. There are signs which indicate individual sounds, sometimes signs which indicate multiple sounds. For instance, there's a sign that looks like a potato that is making that makes the r sound, and there's like a sign for like a folded piece of cloth that makes a sa sound. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's some things called logographs where one sign represents an entire word, and you have to like kind of like memorize it, like Chinese characters. And there were some miners around, I would say around like 1600 BC in Sinai. So it's like in northern Egypt. They were like, okay, fuck this. I'm not going to go and learn all this bullshit because that's expensive and it takes years. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and take this system, take the signs that represent individual sounds, because that's a good idea. And we're going to use that and only that. And the signs, the physical shape of the signs became simpler over time. And now we have something called the Phoenician alphabet. This was a pretty big deal because it was the first fully alphabetic system, and it caught on. It went as far east as India, where it evolved into the Devanagari scripts and the Indian scripts that we see there today, and it went as far west as Italy. Um, and eventually it went north into Greece. And the Greeks looked at this system and they looked at it and they said, okay, this is pretty cool. It's really nice, but we already have a writing system. It's called Linear B. Probably don't know much about Linear B because no one gives a fuck about it. It's basically just a bunch of squiggles where one sign represents an entire syllable. Some pretty innovative stuff. But problem with that is that you can't, individual signs can be a bit hard to interpret. So for instance, the sign, the word for horse, as you would write it in this Linear B script, is the sign for E and the sign for guo. All right. So did they pronounce it as equal? No, they did not. They pronounced it as hikwus. Completely different pronunciation. You just kind of have to know. And so they were like, okay, we'll try and use this Phoenician alphabet, but we're going to go and take some of these signs that we don't need because they represent sounds that we don't have in our language and use them to write down vowels. What the fuck does that mean? Well, it turns out the Phoenician alphabet didn't write down vowels. It only wrote down consonants. Now, that was fine and dandy for Phoenician, the language, but for the Greeks, it was like, no, we're going to have to go and get those vowels in. And so they innovated and they came up with the first alphabetic system that had vowels. Wonderful stuff. And that Greek alphabet, it spread around into the various colonies that Greece had at the time, which at this point we're entering into like the first millennium BC, early first millennium BC. And we're seeing it travel out west into Italy. And that has evolved into the Etruscan alphabet at that point, which was used to write down Etruscan, which was a language that was spoken in Italy, and it died out around 2 AD, and no one cares about it. But the Etruscan alphabet got pretty popular in Italy. It traveled north into Central Europe, and some Germanic barbarians picked it up, and we're going to say that they invented runes because that's what they did. But they also traveled a bit southern into, I would say, central Italy, and there were some people there called the Romans, and they needed a writing system, so they just used that, and that pretty much became the Latin alphabet that we see today. The rest is history.
Wow, that's crazy. It is a very long story, but it makes sense because it is a complex system if you really think about it. Like the fact that, but I mean, it's not complex because 2-year-old or not 2-year-olds, second graders learn it and they can fluently talk about it. But it's complex as in the sense that you have a system almost like math where it's set up and that's what you're going to use unless you learn a different language. If you're speaking English, you use those 26, I think, letters, and that's basically it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something that you can just come up with overnight. So writing has a pattern in the way that it's developed. So people often say that writing started in Mesopotamia with those triangles that no one cares about, and that's technically true. But not all writing evolved from that. There were some civilizations that developed writing independently. And the big five are Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, India, and Mexico. And so, and they all start pretty much the same. They evolve from like these pictures, and everyone can sort of get them because they're pictures. They don't really represent language at that point. But once you start to encode language into these pictures, then you start to get like actual writing. And then you're going to have some people that are like, okay, well, this is a bit tricky because there's like thousands of signs that we have to remember. So how about we just go and have some of these signs represent like phonetic stuff, like actual sounds themselves. And those can either evolve into syllabaries, like with cuneiform, or with, Nahuatl writing, which is found in Mexico, or you can evolve it into individual consonants, which is what the Egyptians did.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always sort of followed that pattern of, really complex thousands of signs simplifying over time and into the modern alphabets that we have today. It's definitely not something that we came up instantly. And to be honest, you wouldn't really think of language as being like individual sounds. because like okay, so like imagine that you're just like some guy in Iraq between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and you're coming up with language. Well, you're not going to go and say, okay, well, these individual words are made up of sounds. No, you're not going to do that. You're not a fucking asshole. You're going to go and say, okay, well, this sign represents water, this sign represents tree, this sign represents the afternoon. And you just keep on doing that until you have all the words in your language written down. And that's what you do, because that's intuitive. You would think of writing as something like that. The idea of signs representing individual sounds is such a foreign concept to, I would imagine, the people who lived in those pre-literate societies.
Yeah, and something that fascinates me is that ancient humans were able to develop a system where they can communicate with each other. When do we think the first language became prevalent in humanity or in human society? What millennia, what century do we think that language began to evolve?
So language is not something that humans are taught. It's an inherent part of our genetic code to learn language. It's a trait that we as Homo sapiens evolved to have. And the reason for why, I don't really know, because I'm not that type of linguist. But I will say that it was an extremely gradual process that took place over multiple thousands of years. And so trying to pin down the first language, although it's a trend that a lot of linguists try to do, we're still very unsure about a lot of things. Some people say that it was 60,000 years ago. Others say that it was 100,000 years ago. So it's a difference of around 40,000 years, quite large. But some things that we do know about the first language was that it started in Africa. It started before humans started to migrate out of Africa and into all the little nooks and crannies and assholes of the world. Because, well, obviously, every person can speak a language. So it's not as though, there were some people who just didn't evolve that language gene and just fucked off somewhere. Because if they did, we would have certainly found them. But no, every person is able to speak a language. Everyone has that language gene. Everyone must have evolved that while we were still, in Africa. So, and more so about the first language, we will probably have no idea what it was like. The vast diversity of human language is vast. and so to try and pin down any specific things about it is just going to bring about a whole bunch of conflicting opinions and arguments and debates online, and just really unnecessarily long comment threads on. So in my opinion, it's a false hope. It's a wild goose chase.
Yeah, and language is so fascinating too, because it's it almost 100% certain that future civilizations will be speaking something entirely different than what we speak currently.
Oh yeah,
language
yeah,
evolves. Even if you go back when the United States became a country in 1776, if you went back and spoke to George Washington, the spoken languages that we speak and they speak are so different. Some would say ours is more dumbed down. I would say it's just more. If you write still, it still is complex and everything. I always hear that English is the hardest language, modern language to learn. I think Russian's up there too, but I think we'd be able to understand them and have an articulate conversation, but it would be so different that it's almost a different language entirely.
Well, no, not really. We're actually able to reconstruct what the founding fathers sounded like, and it's not too crazy. I mean, there's a really good video by a YouTuber called AB Alpha Beta that's actually managed to reconstruct the first part of the Declaration of Independence in the accent that would have been used at that time. And yeah, it's kind of funny sounding. Some people have said that it sounds like Scottish English, but for the most part, you can very much so have a conversation between them.
Yeah, Scottish English. That's funny. Um, you know, as a linguist, when you go back and you're reading history through the lens of a specific ancient language, how much How much does that affect how you listen to the story versus having it translated to you? How you guys can't see this, but he's just staring at me right up close to the camera. How much does how much does reading an actual ancient language of a story change the way you view the story versus being having it translated to you?
Translators can, it all depends on the philosophy of the translator. There are some translations of the Odyssey, for instance, that are much more faithful to the original text, and there are some that are more liberal in their translation. I enjoy both. It all has to do with, an understanding of the culture and of the society and the time that it was written in, and how that can affect the way that more liberal translations can accentuate or diminish certain parts of the story. But in regards to the comparison of the original text, obviously the original text wins every single time, because it's sort of like that set in stone. This is the actual story right here, and every other translation is basically just a derivation of it. There's going to be some difference, even if it's on a microscopic level. So yeah, no, there's always going to be a difference between a translation and the original text. But in regards to what I've read, I don't know ancient Greek. But I have read Beowulf in the original Old English, and it's certainly it's certainly a more poetic style of language. The more contemporary Old English of, say, Alphic of Ensheim is very much so simple in comparison to the language of Beowulf. As I said before, it's more poetic. It uses a lot more metaphorical language. Oceans are called whale roads, and rivers are called swan roads, and swords are sweaty instead of being bloody. There's a lot more metaphor going on. So I can certainly parallel it to more abstract forms of poetry in that regard. And oftentimes these nuances are just translated over for the sake of clarity. People don't translate Swan Road and Whale Road unless they want to be an asshole. They'll just translate it as ocean or river, because no one's gonna know what the fuck that means. Because again, that metaphor, those metaphorical styles, just not used today. They're primarily a feature of Anglo-Saxon poetry. So, but at the end of the day, it all has to do with the philosophy of the translator in regards to how they approach the original text.
All right. After a quick digression, we had to come back, but you guys won't know this because you're just listening. But I just wanted to ask you right after that. I asked you earlier, how many languages do you speak? How many languages can you read?
An excellent question. So I'm familiar with a wide variety of scripts. I know multiple forms of cuneiform, runes. I'm familiar with the Greek alphabet. I know the Arabic alphabets. I'm familiar with various stages of Chinese characters. Basically, everything that I need in order to understand the languages that I'm studying. And I can pick it up pretty easily depending on the difficulty. So about as many as I need.
Yeah, that's honestly pretty fascinating because it's had to have changed the way you think when you speak, right? It had to have changed the words you use. I mean, obviously we all speak English, but just knowing ancient languages or at least being able to phonetically read them and even pronounce them. It's had to have changed the way you can speak other languages, modern languages, when you read them, the way you can pronounce specific words in other languages. I know I've heard you say when you're doing like modern English, you have like this almost dialect that you can do with your voice or accent that you can do with your voice that I won't be able to do if you just told me to read something, And so it's had to have changed the way you think and the way you speak. How much do you think reading ancient languages has changed the way you think, speak, read, everything like that?
You've certainly described it in a lot of detail, but I'm going to have to break the unfortunate news to you. Not that much. I would say that still speak the same type of English and the same style of English as it did even before I started studying ancient languages. And I think that's just a perspective. Uh, no offense at all to you, of course, but I think this is just the perspective of someone who doesn't study ancient languages. It's like, oh my gosh, they're so smart. They must
Yeah.
have like a wide vocabulary. No, it's not really how it works. We speak our languages pretty much the same as everyone else does. It's just that we also happen to know other stuff. But it doesn't really affect the way that we speak English as much as other people think it does. But yeah, it's very unfortunate that I have to go and break this very bad news to you.
No, I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from, and reading ancient languages, obviously you can't use those words in everyday conversations anyways, because nobody would understand what you're saying.
No, no, not really, unfortunately. But it does come in handy. So I was in the DMs of this one girl,
Hmm.
and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I like that you can like speak ancient Greek. It's like really cool and stuff." And I was like, "Okay, cool. Let me just go and be back. I'll be back in like 5 minutes." And so I basically translated a sentence into ancient Greek and I sent it to her. And she said, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool. What does it say?" And I said, "Let me lick your titties, bitch." Let's just say that I was very successful. So I actually can use it in modern connotations.
No,
It
yeah.
it gets me good.
And when you said that you started this to get the hose, has it brought you hose?
It don't no, it has gotten me hose. My oh my gosh, no, it's got me a whole lot of like weird people in my DMs too. Okay, so I'm not supposed to like reveal this to anyone, but yes, this is our secret to keep, and as well as the other people that are listening to this podcast. But basically, I was hit up. I was hit up by this one girl who wanted me to go and translate something for her. And I was like, okay, sure, fine. I'll go and post it. But it was like this like half torn off piece of cardboard that had like 5 letters written, and there was like some other stuff that was like torn off as well, so I couldn't read it. And I was like, okay, where did you get this from? And she basically went on this really huge story, and I don't remember all of it, but basically the story was, so I'm a schizophrenic and I smoke a lot of weed, and I basically was stamping things for this bottle factory company, and it just appeared in midair out of nowhere. And I was like, okay, all right. And basically she just went on this like huge tangent about how she needs to go and solve this in order to unlock the mysteries of the universe. And I was like, you know what? Good for you. Honestly, I support it. We stand. And yeah, and so oh my gosh, it got even weirder the next day because she said that, oh my gosh, I know where this piece of cardboard came from. And she basically sent me like this picture of her room, which had nothing in it. It was this black and white photo of like this window. And she said that it looked just like the piece of cardboard. And I'm like, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. Um, so yeah, no, I think this is more just a consequence of being TikTok famous. You attract a lot of weirdos.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I get lots of hoes in my DMs. I get people who want my children, and people who say that they've made like memes about me, and I was like, okay, sure, that's kind of funny. But yeah,
And you got
I
banned.
oh yeah, no, I got banned twice.
Why?
Yeah,
Why?
so I think the first reason, actually, I know the first reason was because of the fact that I used my account to mass report furries. I basically I reported them for endangerment, and with the added note of these people are a threat to our society. And then 5 days later, I got banned. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go and do that again. So I started this new account, and I got like 500,000 followers. And then I got banned again because I don't know why. But now I'm back on the grind. I have like around a fifth of what I had, which is pretty damn good because I've only been at it for a week. So I've got like I just hit like 100,000 followers like yesterday. Um, and yeah, so I'm just back on the grind. Nothing's ever gonna stop me. Nothing's gonna keep me down. Yada yada yada.
That's so hilarious that you used your. I don't. How many followers did you have on that first account?
I think the peak was around 175,000.
So you had
Yeah.
175,000 followers, and you were reporting furries.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, why do you think you got banned that second time? Is there any reason?
So okay, so TikTok doesn't tell you. So they tell you if they like take down individual videos, they can
Mm-hmm.
like cite it under like bullying or harassment or
Yeah.
you're doing drugs or child endangerment. But when you get banned, they don't tell you, which is really weird because you then have to go and make an appeal to want to get your account back, and it's hard to do because you don't know why you got banned.
Yeah.
Um, you can make a guess every now and then, but yeah, you're kind of you're just sort of left in the dark for the most part. As for why, well, probably never know.
It's so weird because it doesn't seem like you're doing anything like you're not endangering children. I don't think so. Like I don't understand.
No, no, I'm not. But I guess some people think of my videos as being like bullying or harassment because that's what the majority of my you know of my reports have been about, and I can see why they think that. I've once referred to Italians as not being people, and I made fun of the Greeks. It's I can definitely see it.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah. And you said so. You said you used it to get the hose, but have you changed your mind? Are you gonna do something else with it? Are you gonna teach? Maybe are you gonna go back and get a degree in it? What are you gonna do with being a
Oh yeah,
linguist?
no, definitely. Obviously, my I wouldn't have done it to get the hose if I didn't have like an already established interest in it.
Mm-hmm.
It was always having to do with like a love of history, but I didn't want to be like one of those like history bros. You know the type I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be like those type of people. So I thought, well, how can I go and appreciate history in a way that isn't cringe? And so I thought to myself, okay, well, just learn ancient languages. And that's what I've been doing, and I've been loving it ever since.
So yeah, do you want to go back and get a degree in it, get a PhD in it, and then teach or something? What do you want to do?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a difficult question. With things like the internet and readily available resources, the advent of college is just
Yeah.
something that's less and less desirable, especially as it becomes more and more expensive. And I don't really need a PhD in order to do the things that I want to do,
Mm.
because being TikTok famous gets you opportunities.
Yeah, it does.
I was flown out to New York City to cover one of the biggest conventions, one of the biggest anime conventions in the world, and I had a wonderful time, and it was all because of the fact that I was TikTok famous, and I got to meet up with like a whole bunch of creators. I had a really funny story about me being drunk in Times Square and finding myself in a smallest jazz club and throwing up on the pianist. It was a wonderful time. I absolutely love New York.
Why don't you tell that story?
Oh, tell the story? Okay.
Tell the story.
So the thing about New York, I don't know if you've ever been. Have you been?
I have never been.
It's really, really easy to find drugs in New York. And when I say like,
I'm from Las Vegas, so I can kind of understand where that's coming from.
really? Okay, so
Yes.
so here's the thing. I thought that getting drugs was really hard in Las Vegas because isn't it like super illegal?
Marijuana is not. I mean that's not a really hard drug, but dude, I'm talking like I worked at a law firm this summer, and right outside is just people shooting up, doing and I've always heard stories about if you have a little bit of money or clout, like hard drugs, like hard like pills or cocaine, those are not hard to find. I've always heard those stories.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all about who you know. If like and so like when festivals come here, there's always people doing like ecstasy and things like and LSD and things like that. And so it's not. I don't know. I'm sure it's super illegal. Like it's not. You can't just fucking just go do cocaine on the street and be like, hey, you want some?
Yeah.
But I think if you have influence and you have money and you want it, like I'm sure you can find it, you know.
Yeah. Well, finding drugs in New York is stupid easy. And when I say stupid easy, I mean I was in the elevator of the hotel that I was staying at. It was the Millennium of Times Square, New York. It's one of the most expensive hotels
Yeah.
in the entire city. Yeah, like $1,000 a night. I of course got it for free because I have clout. You know how it is. So, I was in the elevator, and this guy, he just went in the elevator, and as we were going down the lobby, he said, "Hey, do you want some weed?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah, I do." And he says, "Okay, give me $40." I was like, "Okay, I'll give you $40." And he hands me two blunts. And so I finished both of them, and now I'm high in Times Square, and I'm freaking out over everything. So there's like street musicians and such. They
Hmm.
play with the saxophone and they bang on drums. I was having a great time, um, just listening to all the sights and sounds. And I, this one time, I found like, okay, so like that. It's hard to describe. Do you know like the type of like Instagram picture background where it's like this white wall with like fake vines hanging down on it?
Yes. Yes.
There was one of those installed in Times Square, and I was right next to it. I just happened to be next to it. And this girl with like another guy holding a camera came by, and I could tell they were looking at me with contempt. They thought I was lower scum. But you know what? At that time, I had like 500,000 followers. They were little fish compared to me. And I was like, and I said to them, who are you? Okay, then bye. And I just left. And so I realized maybe like 10 minutes after that I was not at all functional. And so I hit up my boy Bill. Now, Bill is a content creator on TikTok as well. He's like a philosopher guy. He talks about philosophy stuff. We were mutuals after I made fun of him on one of my videos. I have that tendency.
Nice.
So I hit him up and I was like, "Hey, Bill, I just want to let you know I'm high in Times Square. I'm not functional." And he was like, "Oh my God, you're in fucking Times Square?" Because he didn't know. And I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm here." And he was like, "Okay, wait right there. Actually, no, meet me at Smalls Jazz Club." And I was like, "Okay, Smalls Jazz Club. I don't know where that is." So I go and like look it up on Google Maps and I find it. It must have taken me like, okay, so it felt like 3 hours, but in reality, it might have taken me like 20 minutes um, to get to Small's Jazz Club. And it was like a real like emphasis on small because it was like this fucking tiny hole in the wall that was like on the street corner. Bouncer was there. He also looked at me like I was a fucking moron. But Bill and one of his buds, who I also knew, I was also friends with, he was like a crypto guy on TikTok as well. We met up and he was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were in Times Square. And I was like, yeah, yeah, I'm here. Is this the place? And he's like, yeah, it's the place. And so he walks up to the bouncer and he says, we're going to get the benches reserved for Bill. And he's like, okay, oh, yes, Mr. Petite, the third. We've been expecting you. And I was like, oh shit, here we go. I'm living the bougie lifestyle. So we walked down like 20 flights of stairs. Like it was a hella long trip. We're deep in the fucking asshole of Manhattan. And we enter into this really small rectangular room, right? So you know how rectangles are, two short sides, two long sides. Well, so we entered onto like a short side of the room, right? We were on like the short side, and to the right of us was a bar. To the left of us were some benches that were separated by a rope, right? They were cut off from everything else. In the middle were like 24 seats, 6x4. But on the other side of the room, on the other short side of the room, were instruments: grand piano, double bass, tenor saxophone, electric guitar, everything that you could possibly dream of. Fucking glockenspiel, all sorts of stuff. So we go over to the reserved parts of the room, which were the benches, and we're sitting like right behind the piano. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is such a great experience. I'm having so much fun. And then the bartender comes up and she asks, okay, what do you guys want? And so they all go and order their stuff. But then Bill says, I'll be having two martinis. Sorry, not two martinis, two martinis, one for the kid. And I was like, oh, fuck, they don't ID in this place. So I got myself a green martini, and all the while I'm recording everything. I have like video of like all of this stuff. It's great. Is there a way that I can like send you like photos of this? Oh my gosh, it'd be so cool if it could.
Bro, that would be so
Um,
dope. Maybe through the
chat.
chat. I don't know though.
Oh man, that's crazy. But basically, um, I was just having a great time, and I made this video. Why do I have my hand up? I don't fucking.
I can't say it. It's fine.
Um, so um, I had this green martini, and I was just living the bougie lifestyle pretty much. Oh gosh, and the taste was awful. By the way, every time I think about it, it just sends shivers down my spine. But I must have drunk like half of that green martini when some people were walking up onto the stage and putting their instruments on. Right, they had like this fucking guitar guy had like his sling around it and shit. And Bill like leaned over to me and said, "You ever heard of live jazz before?" And me, in my high, not quite drunk yet state, said, And he said, "Okay, well, you're about to find out." And I thought to myself, okay, well, live jazz, it's nice. It soothes the soul. It's funky. It's not that great. And then they started. And that's when I realized just how zooted off my mind I was off of weed and alcohol, because these motherfuckers started playing. And they just started like tugging at the heartstrings, at like my soul, into my very being. They were like fingering my prostate and stuff. It was great, a full body massage in the metaphorical sense. And I was just having a wonderful time until I started to not have such a wonderful time, because after around like 2 songs were done. And when I say 2 songs, I mean like both of these songs were like 10 minutes long each.
Yeah.
So they were jazz. And so after like 2 songs, I was like kind of like, I was like this, I just like my knees like this. And at that point, my conscience told me, okay, Arum, I don't know what's going to happen within the next 5 minutes, but at the end of those 5 minutes, you're going to throw up. And I was like, all right, I think I can adapt to that. And so I go over to my another friend of mine. I think his name is Joey. And I said, Joey, I need to throw up. And he was like, okay, not right now. I'm currently vibing. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. My apologies. And then I proceeded to throw up on the pianist. It just kind of like ruptured. It was like Mount Vesuvius. It just kind of went all over the place. Thank God it didn't hit any of my friends, which, might have made the night so much worse. But as soon as that happened, Bill got up, rushed me over to the bathroom. Must have been there for like maybe like 5 minutes, but it felt like 30. And then we had to leave because we got kicked out.
Because you threw up on the pianist.
What?
Because you threw up on the pianist.
Oh, yeah. Fortunately, the pianist, surprisingly understanding. He was like, oh, yeah, no, happens all the time. I was like, God bless your soul, So now we're out about in the night streets of Manhattan, and I need to get to my hotel room. And which really sucks because I'm vomiting on every other trash can. And every time I try to like crouch down to try and get like some rest, Bill's like, okay, you got to get up because you're literally like 3 feet away from a cop. I was like, you got it. So we must have walked maybe like 5 to 6 blocks north into Times Square, and we got to my hotel. We're all in the hotel, and he took my shirt off. It was just completely soaked in vomit. It was just the worst experience. And you know what? I had a great time. That was probably the most fun I've had in New York ever.
Where are you from?
I'm from San Diego, California, but I live in Indiana.
Oh, you live in Indiana. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Stories like that, it's not about the actual experience. It's about the ability to have a story like that afterwards, right? Like you have that.
Yeah.
No, it's like you experience that.
You're going to remember this one. Trust me. You're going to tell this to all the people.
Yeah.
It's
So
definitely about that.
Growing up in Las Vegas, I don't know if you've ever I don't know what you guys did for like homecoming and prom, but we would always get a party bus and go to the strip, right? That's what we did. We'd either
The
go see it.
strip.
Yeah, it's like the Vegas skyline, like all the hotels and everything.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just called the strip. That's what it's called. Um, and so we would always go down there and we'd go to maybe a show like Penn and Teller or something or the Blue Man Group. Um, but this one time, right?
Mm.
Um, I think it's my junior year. We go to this hypnotic show. Okay, we go to
Oh,
this
okay.
hypnotic show. So this, little digression. We went there twice. In my senior year, I actually got hypnotized. But my junior year, we go right, and we're
So, like, is it
there.
bullshit or is it like a real thing?
I don't know. I was drunk off my ass. I could have just been, but I don't remember it. Like I was doing it. Like everyone was telling me I was doing everything, and so I think it was probably easier because I was drunk, but like it's probably a little bit of bullshit. I don't know. I was drunk, so I was probably just playing along, or I don't know. Maybe I was hypnotized, but I can't remember because I was, like I said, hammered. But back to junior year, we go, and we're all sitting in these rows, and it's like a bunch of high schoolers, right? And this girl, my friend's date, um, she she turns and throws up on like these two girls who are sitting next to her,
Ooh.
and I'm at the exact same time. I'm like, I gotta go piss. I'm drunk, and then I get up and start walking, and she's like running past me and throws up on me and the floor, and then she
Ooh.
runs and she throw and then I go to the bathroom like, what the fuck, dude? And I'm in there, and her date's in there trying to get the throw up off his jacket. I'm like, I have it on my shoes and my arm, and I'm like, but I'm drunk as shit. I'm like, what just happened? And we all got kicked out and everything, but just I have so many experiences of people, and even myself. Like one of those times I threw up, but you couldn't throw up in the in the party bus, so I threw up in my backpack. It's like I have so many
Oh, man.
experiences where it's like you or one of your friends just fucking got way too fucking blitzed and you just throw up everywhere, but it makes the story better because then you have it
Mhm.
for the rest of the time, and it happens to everybody. It's not like if you drink, it's not like you've never had a time where you've thrown up. Everybody
Mhm.
throws up when you drink.
Mhm. Yeah, no, the big problem with me is that I don't know like when too much is too much. So I end
Mm-hmm.
up drinking like way too much and I end up like super, super drunk. So yeah, I completely understand that.
How old are you?
I'm 19.
You're 19. Yeah. So I turned 21. I'm about to be 22 in March. But like before I was like, obviously I drank before I was 21. Everybody does. It's not like it's fucking everywhere besides the United States is 18. It's not like
Hmm.
kids don't drink, but, turning 21, dude, like I don't know if you have like a year and a half, 2 years, but it's going to change everything because it's like now, once you start going like to like clubs and bars, I don't know, you probably been because you have some, you're TikTok famous, you have some clout, you probably get in, but it changes everything because it's like, all right, now there's a limit because if I get too fucked here, how far am I from where I need to stay? But I'm an adult, so it's on me. Like I can drink as much alcohol as I want here, but it's on me. I can't just throw up wherever I want because I'm not home yet. And it becomes that like, where's the bathroom? How much can I drink? And you start getting better at gauging it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. You hear a lot of weird things about Vegas. I can't imagine living in it because, okay, so the general rule, according to people, is that you don't stay longer than 6 days in Vegas. Longer than that, it's a suicide mission. Is that true?
If you're in Vegas, like if you're in like downtown, the strip, for sure, because you're just going to be killing your body. You're going to be severely hungover. You're gonna be losing money because you're probably gambling and stuff like that. Living in Vegas, though, it's not like all the time I'm downtown. It's not like I'm always going downtown or like growing up. Like I would go for like homecoming and stuff, but I wouldn't go like every weekend. And
Yeah.
and so like I would even say like if you're living here, it's easy to go downtown
No,
every
you're
week.
cutting in and out. Hold
Oh
on.
shit!
What was it? You were.
Sorry, did you hear that?
Yeah, no, I did. So you were talking about how you couldn't just throw up anywhere. I think that's where you left off. And not every place is like downtown.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was saying about living in Vegas. Like, if you go downtown every weekend is at living in Vegas, like it's fun, but like you could lose. Like, it's just so expensive, like to go grab drinks. Like, drinks are so expensive when you go out, and I don't think a lot of people gamble, but if you do, like, you can lose a lot of money. So I think there's a fair. Like, I live in the suburbs of Las Vegas. Like, I'm not, like, I don't need to be downtown. Like, but beyond all popular belief, we don't live, nobody lives like on the strip unless you're like
Hmm.
super filthy. Which, like, even like my girlfriend, her sister and her sister's husband are pretty well off, and they live in a high rise downtown, but it's still far enough from the strip that you're not like, you could get downtown walking, but you're not like on the strip for like 10, 15, 20 minutes walking. So like they even living downtown, like you're far enough away. But like, yeah, like I feel like living in Las Vegas definitely let me have a lot of opportunities, to party. But I feel like it's nothing different than living in like Beverly Hills, LA, or New York. If you
Oh,
live in
I'm
any
sure.
major city
Yeah.
like that, like you're like partying is probably second nature.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely see that.
But yeah, man, I wanted to join back anyways, just because this is a good way to end it. Anyways, we've been on here for about I think we cut off at like 45, and now we're at like 30 something. So we've been on here for over an hour, probably an hour
Right.
20. So this is a good way to end it, bro. I love talking to you.
Yeah, definitely.
You I commend you because like you're not only 19, and you're doing something that nobody does, and you're content creating based on that though. Like, you're not just like, it's really easy to become an influencer and do something that everybody's doing, but you're doing something so drastically different that it's going to take you to a bunch of places.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So yeah, thank you, man, again. I'm gonna edit it and post it, and it'll be out, but I'll tag you and everything. But if you ever want to come back on, bro, please just let me know.
Yeah, of course. I'll be sure to hit you up, man.
Yeah, stay up, have a good day, bro.
Yeah, you too.